Okay, I don't think that this is the greatest image to use. It's fairly flat and there's some patterning to it, but there really isn't a lot of opportunity for real light and shadow to interplay. We do have cast shadow. There's a lot of reflection, but that's not the same thing as shadow. And the choice of this image could have been rethought, and you would have had a more successful result here. The grayscale goes from white into fairly close grays right there, so there isn't really a movement progressing. It goes from the white to the grays, which are very close, to this gray, which is the paper, and then gets darker. So basically from here out to here, we're progressing okay. We should be getting lighter going up to the white. And of course, the grayscale with an even progression from white to black is the guide to determine the values here so we can translate them here. So if we look at this purse, this is a lot darker. So this whole little shape under here should be very dark, almost black, because that's this value. And this value is not anywhere in this drawing. So if I just take the scale, and you can see that that black here is a lot darker than anything in the drawing. And we compare that to the photo, you can see where values start to become similar. So the red-orange in this bag is similar to the value of the paper itself, that center value right there. So this actually is looking very much unfinished. It kind of has the sense that maybe you weren't really that interested in it, in which case better to choose a different image. The other thing I want to mention, and again, we are middle of the term, and we shouldn't be dealing with misalignments at this point or things that are not cut. I don't know if this was just shot on an angle, but this is an issue right here. The gap is wider here than it is over here, and we seem to be kind of moving off on a curve this way. And the grayscale also is narrower here and wider here. So even if this is shot at an angle so that these edges are longer than these edges, there's no reason that these gaps should be doing what they're doing. Everything should be square. You wouldn't present this to a client. This looks very lazy, it looks very shoddy, and at this point in the term, this is really not acceptable in terms of presentation and craft. Okay, the value range here is working fairly well. The application of the values in terms of understanding the lightness all through here and the amount of darkness here needs some help. A lot more lightening in the lighter values of the face. The grayscale is working pretty well. It is representing a full range of value from white to black and a fairly decent progression from the lighter gray through to the darker gray. We do have a lot of curling of corners and some wobbly alignments. I cannot stress how important it is that you have clean, precise craft. If you do not value your work, no one else is going to. If you do not value your work, you devalue your capability, you devalue your worth to the client. There is no reason at this point, again, at this point in the term, that we should be looking at anything that's doing this when it's supposed to be doing this. This is lifted, corners are lifted here. It looks like it's tacked down with double-sided tape or something like that. So really, I'm serious. This is not just going to affect your grades if you don't deal with the craft. this will affect a variety of other things. It's going to affect how people understand the quality of your work. Okay, the value scale here goes from white to a light gray to a darker gray to a really dark gray, then comes back lighter. So there's not a regular progression from light to dark, because it goes dark, then light, then darker, and then black. So this is not working. The grayscale is the first thing to do. In the lecture and in the textbook, it defines what a grayscale is, and there are examples of grayscale. And your first task in this assignment was to create a 7-step, evenly paced grayscale going from white to black. There is a certain order and progression going from white to black, and several of these have not followed that order or progression. So we're looking at the apple. We have a fairly dark core shadow. This is a very good photograph for showing the light logic. It's very well done. So we have the center light over here. We have the highlight here. We have another highlight here. Little bits of highlight on the forward stem. Then we have this really dark core shadow. And then we have the reflected light. We have the cast shadow. And you can see the preciseness of the edge and then the fuzziness of the edge as the shadow extends away from the form. So is this a direct translation of this? And again, we're looking at value. So let's take that grayscale and let's bring it over here. And so we're comparing, see that light value and how this pretty much blends. If you squint your eye, you're going to lose that boundary. Whereas this boundary is very distinct against the light background. This is fairly distinct against the light background. This is easier to see, but if you squint your eye, this square actually blends with the background. So what does that tell you? The background value is this, not the paper. Here is the value that all of the background should be. The red is darker than the background. This core shadow needs to be a lot darker here. You've got a good density and darkness here. That's very high value. That's working really well. And so your cast shadow is a good representation of what's going on. But everything else is just kind of flat. And this should all be a lot darker to bring out the robustness of that form. Values make a huge difference. Okay, same thing here. First of all, your grayscale looks like it's truncated. There's black and 2 grays that are similar and then white, and you've got little bits in between. So where are the other 3 values? So again, the first thing you needed to do was create the grayscale. Before you started working any values in on the drawing, create the grayscale, because that is your guide to understand what values you have going on in the drawing. So this wedge of her hat, the background here and the background here are indeed about the same value, so that's translated really well. But the lightest areas on her skin are darker than the background, and you've got them almost as light. So this is actually making her look very flat. The upper lip, there's a lot more dark than in the lower lip. So because the values are all the same, everything is kind of flattening out. Watch attentively for subtle changes in the values. Grayscale here looks pretty good. It could go darker. It's kind of a long, slow progression, and all of a sudden it's black. So we go, this is probably a 40% gray, so it's not even a direct mid value. And this is all, by the way, allowing for the actual photography and the action of the light on the textured paper and things like that. But the value scales pretty much across the board are weak in terms of understanding what you're supposed to be doing and how to actually create the value scale in order to use it for this assignment. What we have here in the drawing is a dark area here and a dark area here, and we've really neglected all of this, and we've neglected the darkness that's definitely here. And then watch what those shapes are doing. The background's pretty good because the cool gray and then kind of that warm pinkish rosy color are very close in value, and so you've got that very slightly differentiated. The thing is, at least on my screen, what the photograph is doing is that the gray in the upper area is darker than the pinkish in the lower area. And there's some texturizing here that didn't get translated well here. Good design is in the details. Excellence is in how you pay attention to things. Your presentation matters. This is well presented, so if you're having trouble with the craftsmanship and the presentation in terms of getting edges square, this is definitely lined up. Fairly even gutter. We don't detect any curling on the corners. No drop shadows indicating that the corners are not adhered to the board. Everything is aligned. So this edge is paralleling this edge, and this is lining up. Lining up here, lining up here. Very nice presentation. Okay, looking at the grayscale, there is a lot of dark. So this is probably about a 30 to 40% gray. So we go from white to a fairly dark gray, a mid-value gray, and all the way to black. The white is pretty good. The black is pretty good, but we're missing a couple steps in here. So this could be a little more evenly paced. And then it's the range, not the number of value steps by which you translate this to this. So if we look at this, the darkness is fairly dark. We are going to account for a possible sheen on the paper, the printing paper. And then we have white, various places. And then everything in between. So this has a full range of value. The figure is darker than the background and also lighter. The apparel is lighter than the background. The figure pretty much overall is darker than the background, lighter in here. Starts to blend, starts to merge, integrate with the background right in here. A little lighter here, but mostly there is a strong figure ground separation with very little integration. And as we're looking here, the darks are pretty good. The lights in the shoulders and the sleeves are probably not light enough. The shadows are fairly dark and severe here. And if we compare this value here, it's actually lighter than this value. The whole point of this is, yes, it's a drawing, but the whole point of it is to understand, recognize, observe, and emulate value, copy the value in the photo into the drawing. And it's those value relationships that reveal form. It's the light-dark by which we see form. Things are plotted fairly well here. It's very convincing, but overall the background needs to be a lot lighter, and there's a severe difference here between the whites, which are fairly accurate here, and then the colors that surround right in here. This is a lot lighter. And so the idea is to use this grayscale and basically pull it and basically use it as a basis for assessing the values. So you can see where the values start to merge with the background, where they start to merge with the color in the image, then the values are similar. So for instance, right here, the values are fairly similar because we're losing that boundary. Here the values are very different. There's a high contrast because this is a lot darker, the sleeve is a lot lighter, and this pops forward. Here the white kind of merges with the blue-green in the background. So if we translate this over here, you can see how much darker the background is than what's over here. A good start, it has a sense of being unfinished. If you squint at the photograph, you see that there is a light shadow area. There's a lot of fill light coming in, so there's a lot of light reflecting back into the left side of her face. Obviously, the direct light is coming from her upper right, but there's a lot more value in here, a lot more dark value. Because where you don't have the value contrast, you don't have the form. So you can already start seeing how the form becomes more robust simply because of punching the contrast, punching the values in the piece. Okay, the plotting in this is pretty good. The value scale isn't bad. So if we're looking at the values here, the only thing that approaches the white is right in here and right in here. The background is pretty dark, and that's translated fairly well. Looks like he kind of went square by square to lay in the background, but it's very dark down in here. And it looks like you're using the bare paper as this value. It would probably be better to use it as this value right in here. But we can get these more round. You know, the more you observe, and actually the more you draw, the better you become at observation, the better you become at seeing the details. And sure, I'm doing this in Photoshop, but I've already demoed using the paper. But you can see how much more robust that now is simply with these changes. This is pretty good. If you compare the value of the shadows right in here with the value of the trunk, you can see that they're fairly close. And here there's a huge difference. So these should be laid in with a little more force, shall we say, a little more definitive idea there to get the brightness of the light, the amount of light and the nature, the quality of the light in this. You've got to use the darker shadows. Strong light creates strong shadows, and that's something not just photographically, but when you are designing space and light is one of your elements that you're designing with, the stronger the light, the brighter the light, the more hefty the shadows are going to be. So the value of the tree on this in terms of the form shadow, and we're looking toward the light, so the value of the tree trunk works really well. the values that are translated here to here everywhere else are too light overall. And this grayscale is kind of not working because we've gone from white and then we've gone darker to the mid value, then we've gone very light again, and then we've gone darker, and all of a sudden we're black. So this is not a gradated 7-step grayscale from white to black. And the last one we'll look at in this round is this one, and this is obviously an architectural piece. And if you look at the photo, this is very dark up in here. This is dark. This is really dark, and that's what you've kind of caught here. But then the carpeting, the blue here, is fairly dark as well. And also the treads are fairly dark. In terms of the plotting, it looks like for some reason the angles are off on the steps, because these are definitely curving and angled and these really aren't. If you look at this line and estimate that angle off of the horizontal, here's your horizontal line, so then you want to estimate what that angle is. And here's the horizontal line here, and here's sort of the angle that you have. So they're not the same. So the reason for the grid is to help you plot and also to estimate those angles. But all of this should be fairly dark. And that's going to allow the forms to separate. So you can kind of see the difference there. Now the stairs are all fairly much the same value. The risers, the wall, the railings, and this little counter area over here, they're all fairly much the same value. So what we're doing is relying on the surrounding colors, which are a lot darker. And your grayscale is pretty much all light, so we don't see any of the darker values down in here. It should be evenly stepped from white to black. And then that gives you the range of value that you look for in here to translate to here. So we do have black, and we do have almost white, and we've got bits of other values all the way up and down that scale in the photograph, which should be translated into the drawing, and they aren't. So go back, and this is for everybody, review the principles of value, review value contrast, value key, value relationships, and start looking for these elements and principles at work in the world around you, because you are constantly looking at value. So become aware of what you're looking at. Pay attention to what you see.